So I think Sessions is going to be a complete disaster as Attorney General in so many different areas. I think he's going to be the most dangerous Attorney General in modern American history. Certainly the most hostile to voting rights, the most sympathetic to the Confederacy, the person with the longest record of opposition to civil rights in modern American history. I mean, in my book, I looked at attorney generals for Nixon and Reagan and George W. Bush, and they did a lot of bad stuff. But nobody who was chosen was as extreme as Jeff Sessions. And the amazing thing about Sessions is he was blocked as a federal judge in 1986, basically because he had done both racist things, like prosecuting civil rights activists for voter fraud, and said a lot of racist things. I mean, he said that NAACP and ACLU were communist and un-American. He called a black prosecutor boy. He said the Voting Rights Act was intrusive legislation. So you'd think if you were blocked as a federal judge in 1986 because you were too racist, you would try to be less racist in the future. But he's done the opposite. Whether he was Attorney General of Alabama or as a senator for the last 20 years, he has consistently, on basically every single issue, been on the wrong side of civil rights. And now he's going to be the most powerful person, the most powerful law enforcement official in the government, one of the most powerful cabinet members. Trump doesn't know anything about the law, so he's going to defer to Sessions almost completely. It's not like going to be where Obama's a constitutional law professor and has some input here. So this is going to be a real test of the rule of law in this country. I think a lot of people think that our democratic institutions can withstand this. But I'm not so sure. I think when you put enough people in the administration who just have a complete contempt for the mission of their office, you start looking at a serious constitutional crisis.
All right. Well, let's back up, because your piece on Sessions, when you start to hear the intensity of his, just talk about the story of Turner and Hogue and that prosecution.
So Sessions prosecuted 3 civil rights activists who had been very active in the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. One of them, Albert Turner Jr., was basically Martin Luther King's right-hand man in Alabama. He was from Perry County, which is next to Selma. He marched on Bloody Sunday in Selma behind John Lewis. And they had built, both Albert Turner, his wife, and another person who was prosecuted, Spencer Hogue, had built a really formidable organization of black political power in the Alabama Black Belt, a place where African Americans had been disenfranchised for many, many years. And one of the things they had done in recent elections was to help elderly and sometimes illiterate black voters who were born during Jim Crow cast absentee ballots. That was something that was very standard throughout Alabama, that was used by many white politicians. And this came to the attention of Jeff Sessions, and Sessions prosecuted them for voter fraud. And it was extremely controversial because, as I mentioned earlier, they hadn't done anything wrong. White officials hadn't been prosecuted for the same thing. But basically, this was a very, very high-profile trial in the 1980s. He lost the case. The defendants were acquitted within 3 hours, so it wasn't a very strong case to begin with. And this was a case that really led to Sessions being blocked as a federal judge in 1986. And as I mentioned, he really has not changed his position on this stuff at all. He, for example, cheered the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. I just read a piece in the New York Times Magazine where Sessions, a Trump official, said that Sessions would do it all over again if he had to prosecute them, which is just really astounding. I mean, he hasn't learned anything from the mistakes that he's made, and he's just really, really worried. Like, this was when he was just a U.S. attorney in Mobile, Alabama. Now he's going to be attorney general, and what's he going to do? And I think that's the really scary part here.
And so what are there specific questions that you think should be asked of Sessions in this sort of, I guess, area of Voting Rights Act, of voting rights?
Well, I think he just really needs to be pressed on things, because when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, he said that no one is being discriminated against based on the color of their skin in places like Alabama and North Carolina and Georgia, and that's just simply factually not true. We have a long court record in places like North Carolina where the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals said that black voters were targeted with, quote, almost surgical precision. We have in Alabama, his home state, the fact that they tried to close 31 DMVs after passing a voter ID law in majority black counties. So places all across the South.
That's a coincidence, all right.
I mean, so the Alabama Department of Transportation just settled with the Justice Department on this and reopened the hours because they found that this was discriminatory. So I mean, I really think that he needs to be pressed on this stuff. I mean, he did award last year the Congressional Gold Medal to the Selma marchers, which was completely symbolic. But he gave an interesting speech where he said that, I was wrong when it came to civil rights back in the 1960s. I didn't do enough. So I think he needs to be pressed and said, okay, well, if you admit that you were on the wrong side of civil rights back then, and you took the effort at least to give the Selma marchers a gold medal, why aren't you restoring the Voting Rights Act that he nearly died for? Why are you supporting efforts to make it harder to vote that the civil rights community unanimously opposes? It can't just be about symbolism here, and I think, he has to be pressed on what he would do in these voting rights cases. There's a lot of cases right now that the Obama administration has filed against Texas, against North Carolina, that are going before the Supreme Court. Is Sessions going to switch sides in these cases? Is he going to side with Texas and North Carolina instead of the previous positions of the Justice Department? So there's a lot to look at here, and I'm very, very, very concerned about his record.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Over. Subscribe.